free society. As the service has proceeded this morning, Pastor Williams, I confess to you that I was trying to decide whether I would give the redacted version of my address or the unredacted version of my address. I have decided to give the unredacted version of my address so that all of you will not have to take up valuable time wondering about what I left out. I am going to give the whole thing and then sit down. Free speech, free press, and free society are concepts which must be discussed within the context of history to be fully understood and appreciated. One of the most profound utterances in the history of humankind, reflecting a recognition of faith in God and in the universally correct perception of humanity, was proclaimed in these words: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Uttered and declared on July the 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence. In America, that is where we start. A recognition and belief in three things: truth, God, and unalienable rights which are conferred by God upon every human being. We who sit in this congregation this morning fully understand that the founding fathers, although they had come to a recognition of a great truth, they did not apply that truth to black people, nor were white women included. History records, however, that a black man by the name of Crispus Attucks, an American stevedore of African and Native American descent, was widely regarded as the first person killed in the Boston Massacre, and thus the first American killed in the American Revolution. Those truths described in the Declaration of Independence were enshrined in the United States Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. We are painfully aware once again that those who crafted the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, which is the supreme law of the land, did not include people of color or women to benefit from its provisions. The unredacted truth is that people of color, Native Americans, black people, slaves were not considered to be human beings worthy of recognition under the laws of America. And that our reflection of Law Day must include a reflection upon the monumental, epic struggle and profound sacrifice within this nation to emerge from the barbarism of slavery, a governmentally enforced, brutal, and dehumanizing system of apartheid segregation, a pervasive and institutionalized practice of prejudice, discrimination, and racism, the remnants of which are still present and recurring in our society at this present hour as we sit here today in the state of Alabama and across this nation. In my hometown of Tuskegee, Alabama, there is a Veterans Administration Hospital which was established in 1923 after World War I. There was no place for black veterans of that war to receive medical care in the South. Because of racism, they could not go to the VA hospitals where white veterans were treated. The president of Tuskegee Institute, Dr. Robert R. Milton, the successor to Dr. Booker T. Washington, petitioned the federal government to build a VA hospital in Tuskegee, where Tuskegee Institute donated the land where it was built, and the Institute recruited black doctors and medical professionals from across the nation to staff that hospital. Black veterans have bravely and patriotically fought in the military for every single war, for rights which they could not personally enjoy as citizens in their own country. VA hospitals across the nation often have signage outside of their facilities, and the one in Tuskegee has this sign, which says, "The price of freedom is visible here." The price of freedom is visible here. Freedom is not free. It exacts huge costs from some who pay the ultimate sacrifice of their lives. Others survive, but many of them are permanently maimed and injured in mind, spirit, and body. Free speech, free press, and a free society are not free at all. Here in Montgomery, Alabama, especially, and elsewhere in the state of Alabama, we are acutely and intimately aware that the price of freedom is visible here. For people of color, particularly African Americans, brought here as slaves in the thriving slave markets of Montgomery, Alabama, right down the street from this church, after an horrific civil war meant to emancipate the slaves and an end to the violent armed rebellion against the Constitution. And the constitutional amendments, such as the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, meant to grant freedom, citizenship, due process, and equal protection of the laws to former slaves and their descendants. Alabama and other southern states particularly steadfastly, defiantly resisted and rebelled against such notions of freedom and equality. Black citizens in Alabama were further victimized by over 100 years of domestic terrorism by the Ku Klux Klan and other violent white supremacists, subjected to brutal racial discrimination in every conceivable form through segregation, Jim Crow laws, and racial prejudice and discrimination, which officially amounted to government-sanctioned racism. The Lynching Memorial, the Legacy Museum, the Rosa Parks Museum, the legacy of the Confederacy depicted all over this city, historical places, events, and people of the modern civil rights movement, such as Dr. King, Dr. Abernathy, E.D. Nixon, Frank M. Johnson Jr., Clifford Durr and Virginia Durr, Rosa Parks, Johnny Carr, the Montgomery Improvement Association, Dr. Thelma Glass, a member of this church, and a member of the Women's Political Council, Dr. Jefferson Underwood II, a member of this church, and the personal physician of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and your former pastor in the 1950s, Reverend Waldo Hilson. So many of the ones that are known and so many more are unknown and unheralded participants, and witnesses, all that testify to the unredacted truth that everywhere you look in Montgomery, you see evidence that the price of freedom is visible here. All over Alabama, just the names: Selma, Birmingham, Lowndes County, Tuskegee, Haynesville, and many other names should cause vivid images in our minds about the costs paid in these places for freedom. If this litany does not rekindle facts and images in your mind about the legal evolution of the United States Constitution and the struggle for justice in America, then you need to study history much more deeply, because some things are seriously lacking in your education. That goes for everyone in this sanctuary today, regardless of race, creed, color, age, or sex. If you do not know and appreciate history, then we are probably going to repeat much of it to the detriment of progress in our state and nation. There are signs and examples of that recurring all over the country. We are repeating the mistakes and tragedies of the past. Let me give you some brief examples which illustrate what I am trying to convey to you today, that the price of freedom is visible here. First example, free speech. On February 26, 1965, an activist and church deacon, Jimmy Lee Jackson, was shot and killed by an Alabama state trooper during a peaceful march in Marion, Alabama. To protest that brutal murder, a march was organized to walk the 54 miles from Selma to Montgomery, and in an exercise of free speech, to deliver the grievances against racial repression experienced in Selma, Alabama, to Governor George C. Wallace, as was their protected right and freedom of free speech under the Constitution and the laws of Alabama to do. When the fully peaceful marchers, exercising their unalienable rights under the U.S. Constitution, crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge on March the 7th, 1965, they were met by Alabama state troopers and members of the Dallas County Sheriff's Mounted Posse. And under orders from Governor George C. Wallace, they were brutally beaten and trampled by horses and choked by tear gas in a shocking outrage. Around the world it was broadcast, and it was known as Bloody Sunday. On March the 9th, 1965, after a second attempt to complete the march failed, a group of white men beat and murdered a white civil rights activist by the name of Reverend James Reeve, a Unitarian minister from Boston, on the streets of Selma, Alabama, when Governor Wallace, refusing to protect the marchers, President Lyndon Johnson ordered 1,900 members of the Alabama National Guard federalized under federal orders and sent in federal troops, the FBI and United States Marshals, to protect the marchers as they exercised their United States constitutional rights of free speech. That march concluded with 25,000 people marching up Dexter Avenue, right outside this church, to the state capitol, where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. proclaimed that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Second example, free press. During the wretched legalized period of legal apartheid known as segregation, which was particularly cruel and dangerous in Alabama, the 1950s and the 1960s were the period of time that I came of age as a teenager, graduating from high school in 1967 and from college in 1971. I remember as a young child when I was just able to complete simple chores as an elementary school student, my father sent me to the nearby store with a dime to get a newspaper known as the Montgomery Journal, which was published on a daily basis here in Montgomery and distributed in Tuskegee and surrounding towns and cities in central Alabama. I returned from the store with the newspaper and handed it to my father, who immediately frowned at me and said, "Why did you bring me this white newspaper?" I was confused, and I asked him, "What do you mean this is a white newspaper?" And he carefully explained it to me. That even the newspapers were segregated in the 1950s and the 1960s. Each day, the Montgomery Journal printed 2 newspapers. Does anybody remember that? 2 newspapers. One was for white people, which only had news about white people in it. The only time news about black people was printed in the white newspaper was when some criminal act had occurred and black people were being charged and convicted or accused of some negative thing. No news whatever was printed in the white newspaper about black people that was positive or considered to be good news about black people. My father explained to me that if you look at the masthead on the front page of the Montgomery Advertiser, you would see 2 stars printed on the top of the paper. That meant that that paper had inserted in it what was known as the color sheet. Anybody know what I'm talking about? The colored sheet in the newspaper. You had to buy the paper that had the 2 stars printed on it in order to receive the colored sheet as an insert. The colored sheet was one full-size insert which was printed on both sides with news about black people. It contained articles about local events and matters containing black people, wedding announcements for black people, and death notices. Understand, I said death notices. That was the heading for black people on the colored sheet, showing the black funeral home and the announcement of their passing. The newspaper saved the title obituaries solely for the white newspaper. My father wanted a newspaper with the colored sheet in it so that he could find out something about what the black people were doing. That's what he explained to me. And from that time on, when I went to the store to get the paper, I always looked for the 2 stars in the end. Free speech. There were no black newspapers printed in Tuskegee at that time, and I learned early in my life that a free press in Alabama was not available to black people. Most papers did not have the colored sheet. They simply refused to print anything about black people except news of criminal convictions and arrests, which served to show that black people were kept under control, and that was probably nothing good that could come out of the black community. At least that was the message that was printed. free society. In 1956, the Attorney General of Alabama, John Patterson, who later became governor of Alabama, brought a lawsuit in the Circuit Court of Montgomery County, Alabama, challenging the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and claimed that they violated a state statute requiring foreign corporations to qualify before doing business in the state. The NAACP, a nonprofit membership corporation based in New York, had not complied with the Alabama statute as it believed that it was exempt from doing so. Since it was a non-profit membership organization, it was not for profit. The state suit sought both to prevent the NAACP from conducting business in Alabama, but also it sought to remove the NAACP from the state. The Alabama Attorney General claimed in his lawsuit that the NAACP had involvement with the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955 and had a role in funding and providing legal assistance to black students seeking admission to the University of Alabama and other white universities. And accordingly, as stated in the lawsuit filed by the Attorney General, it thus was causing irreparable injury to the property and the civil rights of the residents and citizens of the state of Alabama, for which criminal prosecution and civil actions at law afford no adequate relief. On the very day the lawsuit was filed in the Montgomery Circuit Court, an ex parte restraining order and injunction was issued by the Circuit Court enjoining the NAACP from conducting business in the state of Alabama or taking steps to even qualify to do so. They said they had made a mistake and hadn't registered. The injunction says you can't even register. And you must stop all actions. The state of Alabama then issued a subpoena to force the NAACP to disclose to Alabama state officials the names and addresses of all NAACP agents and all NAACP members located in the state of Alabama. The NAACP refused to comply with the subpoena and was held in contempt of court and fined $100,000. The United States Supreme Court reversed the orders of the Alabama state courts, including the Alabama Supreme Court, which had upheld the subpoena and the contempt fine. The U.S. Supreme Court found that Alabama violated the U.S. Constitution, freedom of association rights of NAACP members. Freedom prevailed, but it took 5 long years of struggle and legal battles to overturn that injunction. For 5 years, the NAACP was outlawed and banned in the state of Alabama because it was doing its job to promote the advancement of colored people. Fourth example, on December 17, 1957, the Alabama voters in a statewide referendum adopted Amendment 132 to the Alabama State Constitution. What is Amendment 132 to the Alabama State Constitution? It was an amendment to abolish Macon County and to divide its landed area and population among the neighboring counties. It was passed by the legislature, put on a statewide ballot, and it passed and became a part of the Alabama State Constitution on December 17, 1957. The Montgomery Advertiser stated in its headline article that day, and I quote, this is what was written in the newspaper: white segregationists, fearful that Negro voters ultimately may control Macon County, propose to abolish the county if need be, to prevent it. Negroes outnumber white residents in the county nearly 7-1. Sponsors of the Abolition Amendment hope to break up the heavily concentration of Negroes, politically speaking, by dividing them among counties which have white population majorities. State Senator Sam Inglehart, who was a resident of Short, Alabama, in Macon County, who was the state senator, proposed the bill to abolish his own county rather than let black people vote in Macon County. Sam Inglehart was also a White Citizens Council leader and sponsor of the amendment for pushing for ratification. The article goes on to say, a committee composed of legislators from Macon, Bullock, Elmore, Lee, Montgomery, and Tallapoosa counties shall meet and determine how the land and population of Macon County shall be divided among the contiguous counties. The reason given for the amendment was that the colored citizens were on the verge of gaining too much political power. The only reason that Macon County was not abolished because the law had been passed. The citizens of Alabama had voted for it and passed it as a part of the Constitution that Macon County would no longer exist. The only reason that it did not come to full fruition was because after the committee met, they could not decide what to do with those radical, educated black people at Tuskegee Institute. Because they feared that if those educated black people at Tuskegee Institute came to their county, they would disrupt the status quo by agitating to vote and demanding full rights as citizens. Nobody wanted my educated parents and me as a child in their county feel that we might want to enjoy our unalienable rights and the freedoms guaranteed under the Constitution of the United States. Says nobody would take Tuskegee and the VA hospital and all those black doctors and all those black professors and all those black educated people who lived in Tuskegee. The whole plan failed. Not because they didn't want it to go through, but they didn't know what to do with black people who are armed with education, armed with knowledge, armed with a fervor to live as citizens of the United States of America. And this amendment, number 132, all you lawyers go look in the Code of Alabama, it's still there. It was repealed 25 years later in 1982 when Representative Thomas Reed, a black legislator from Macon County, placed Amendment 406 to repeal Amendment 132 to the Alabama Constitution before the people for a vote, and it passed. The final example. On November the 2nd, 2017, did you hear what I said? Let me say this again. On February the 2nd, 2017, just 2 years ago, a 3-judge federal court found that Alabama legislators unconstitutionally relied on race in redrawing 12 state legislative districts. In 2014, the United States Supreme Court considered the case and found that Alabama had a statewide policy of racial targets designed to keep the black population in concentrated black districts, which resulted in illegal racial gerrymandering. The United States Supreme Court sent the case back for review by the lower federal court, and a 3-judge panel of federal district judges sitting in Montgomery unanimously agreed that in 14 of the 36 legislative districts, legislators unjustifiably used race as the dominant or controlling consideration in redrawing district lines. We are not talking about old matters that happened back in the 40s and 50s and 60s alone. talking about things that happened 2 years ago. And if time permitted, I could tell you about things that are happening right now. These are few examples, hopefully, that illustrate clearly that the price of freedom is visible here. Free speech, free press, and free society. The second verse of the great anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, sums up the matter adequately. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died. Yet with a steady beat, have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed? We have come over a way that with tears has been walked. We have come, treading our path through the blood of the slaughter, out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. Young sisters and brothers, looking to find your path in life, you who are early in your careers on the bench and bar, those who are veterans of the battles for justice, you who are eagerly seeking political office, or who have already attained those offices, you who are voters and citizens, the anthem states that we are now standing where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. That means it is our turn, since we are now here having come through what everyone else has done. We are here now. We are here now. And it is our responsibility to continue to stand up for justice, stand up for the Constitution of the United States, stand up for the freedoms of speech, press, and society. Others have given their all, made significant contributions, advanced the cause, and lifted us up, and have been worthy successors to those who came before and sacrificed so much. The question is, what are you doing to pay your rightful dues, to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States and the freedoms given to each of us? There are no free rides. Locally, statewide, and nationally, the coming days are going to be very troubling and very difficult. Look around, reflect, remember, and study your history and take positive actions. And as the scripture lessons tells us, speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and the needy, because the price of freedom is visible.